Cruella, Disney's latest live-action movie about arguably their biggest ever villain. An origin story for Cruella DeVille starring Emma Stone and Emma Thompson. Now I know what you're thinking, another grown-ass man on the internet talking about a movie made by Disney based on a children's cartoon. Now I've stated many times on this channel that I'm a big Disney fan, but one movie I was never really that interested in was 101 Dalmatians. I watched it when I was a kid, both the animated version and the 90s live action version, and I was never really that interested in it. It was definitely never one of my favorite Disney movies, but one thing that always stuck in my mind is the villain from that movie, Cruella DeVille. Arguably one of the most iconic villains Disney have ever had. Definitely in the animated one, she looked very evil. And of course her whole thing was she wanted to murder dogs to make a coat. So that's the most evil thing I could ever think of when I was a kid. But here's the thing. Cruella DeVille has had multiple movies, both animated and live action. Many people consider Glenn Close's Cruella DeVille to be a very iconic character. So Emma Stone had a big job stepping into those shoes in this movie. We'll talk about how she got on with that a little later on. Going into this movie, as I said, I wasn't a huge fan of 101 Dalmatians, either version of it when I was younger. And then I saw that the runtime was over 2 hours and I was a little bit trepidatious going into this one. I didn't have super high expectations. I wasn't expecting too much from it. To be honest, I expected to hate the movie. Just going to be out there right from the start. I expected it to be a bit boring and I couldn't see what they were going to do to just make the story of Cruella DeVille that interesting. And I can immediately say I was wrong. I love this movie. I think Cruella is the most enjoyable movie I've watched this year. And I just watched Army of the Dead last week. Now, of course, I've said in the past I love Disney, but that's mostly referring to Pixar stuff and animated stuff. Their live action stuff's been hit and miss. The live action Lion King was interesting, but then again, it's basically an animated movie. I think the last live action Disney movie I liked was Tomorrowland, but this one is on a different scale. So there's a lot to talk about with this movie. So first of all, one thing I really enjoyed about this movie is the overall look and style of the movie. The set dressings, color correction, the use of color, the costume design, it's all fantastic. And you might be saying, yeah, well, it's Disney. They have these huge budgets. It's expected of them. Well, why haven't they done it in the past? The use of pastel colors and the use of color within the movie, it's not over the top. It's fairly muted, a lot of the colors, but it works really well. The movie certainly has its own unique look, unique style that separates it from other movies that are just coming out at the moment as well. I thought the movie looked spectacular. Then you've got the soundtrack, and I think the soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks any movie's had for the last 10 years. You've got a lot of really good music, a lot of British music in there. You got some ELO in there. There's an interesting cover of Come Together from the Beatles and a very interesting cover of Whole Lotta Love from Led Zeppelin. When the cover for Whole Lotta Love came on, it's a much slower pace and the interesting riff. I spotted the riff straight away and I was like, that sounds so familiar, and I was tapping along with it and I was like, that's Whole Lotta Love, isn't it? And I found myself singing along with it. Maybe it's just I love that song. Yeah, the use of music within the movie, the original covers, the soundtrack in itself, that's all fantastic. And of course, Disney would have hired the best sound engineers in the world, so the sound's fantastic as well. There was no mumbling, there was no hard to hear people, like say with something like Tenet, where you couldn't really hear what people were talking about sometimes because the music was so loud. The movie's mixed very well, sounds good, looks good, off to a great start. Then you've got the cast. The two main actresses, Emma Stone and Emma Thompson. I'm pretty much going to watch most of the movies they're in from now on. They're both established as very good actresses. Emma Thompson in particular has a fantastic back catalogue, and Emma Stone's been in some very good movies down the years. Zombieland is a particular favourite of mine. And of course she was in La La Land. I think she was Academy Award nominated for that too. On top of that, you got Joel Fry and Paul Walter Hauser, who started off playing as Cruella's or Estella's friends and become her henchmen from the movie. And Paul Walter Hauser, he is more recently remembered for me from Cobra Kai, when he was playing like the funny guy in like season 2. But the interesting thing was he was playing British in this, and at first I was like, oh no, an American doing a British accent, this never goes well. No offense to Americans out there, but come on, it doesn't. Have you seen Wild Mountain Thyme? That's an Irish accent, but generally American actors can't do other accents as well as British actors can do it the other way. Paul Walter Hauser does a really good job with his over-the-top British accent, EastEnders type of British accent. He clearly watched Phil Mitchell and was like, that's the accent for this. He does a good job, he's pretty funny in the movie as well. Mark Strong's in there too, fantastic addition to any cast, especially if you're doing a British movie or a movie set in Britain. It seems law that you have to have Mark Strong in there now. But the cast was fantastic, everybody fit their roles really well. Emma Thompson is a fantastic villain, playing the Baroness, the over-the-top, egotistical, basically Cruella DeVille by a different name. But then Emma Stone, who, as I already mentioned, is a very good actress, is playing the lead role, the arguably one of the most iconic Disney villains of all time. Big shoes to step into, having stepped in Glenn Close's shoes, and of course there's an animated version of the character as well. But I think Emma Stone did a very good job of making the character her own. You know, she's not trying to be someone else's character. She has the split thing where she has to be Estella sometimes and Cruella at other times, and the switch of just going to madness and a bit more insanity is done very well. She also is pretty good at showing emotion throughout the movie. She's not too over the top. While she is over the top, she is not too over the top in my opinion, and I think her performance was fantastic. If this was a unique story that we hadn't seen before, a character we hadn't seen before in a standout movie, or even a movie similar to like the Joker, I think people would be saying she could be up for awards because I think her performance was that good. Now, I'm sure there'll be people out there disagreeing with that, but personally I thought Emma Stone was fantastic in this, and this is possibly her best movie to date. Then in the movie, you've got to talk about the CGI, because a lot of the dogs within the movie are CGI. And for the most part, the CGI looks pretty damn good. Lately, we've seen movies like The Lion King or Lady and the Tramp get their live action reboots, and the CGI looks fantastic. But it's about 90% there. It's much better than it was, say, 10 years ago, but it's still not 100%. But for the most part, it looks pretty damn good, apart from when they try to make animals, and dogs in particular, do facial expressions. Most dogs don't really do facial expressions in the way they do in Disney movies. And when they do a close-up of an animal's face and he's like smirking or smiling or something like that, it looks a little bit off. For the most part, the CGI was pretty passable. As I say, it's 90% there. I think within the next 5 to 10 years, they'll get it fully there, and the CGI will be indecipherable from the live action stuff. Eventually, it's getting there. As I say, 90% there. We'll get there in the not too distant future. So as I mentioned at the start of the review, before I went to watch the movie, I found out that it was over 2 hours long. 2 hours and 15 minutes, I think it is. So I was going in going, okay, this could be a dragged out story where they're trying to drag everything out, get the most out of the character. It could be pretty slow and boring. That's kind of what I expected from the movie, but I was completely wrong on that. Pacing of the movie, it's fantastic. It's not slow by any means. The scenes come and go pretty damn quickly, but not too quickly to the point where they're skimming over things. I think they just about got it spot on with the pacing of this movie. It's edited very well, and it keeps the audience engaged all the way through. I can't remember any point when I found myself reaching for my phone. I was constantly getting snapped back to attention, and my attention was being kept at peak levels because of the pacing of the movie and the use of the music in the movie and the interesting set pieces throughout the movie. So the pacing within the movie is fantastic. As I said at the beginning, it's one of the most enjoyable to watch movies I've seen this year, perhaps in the last 2 or 3 years. All of these aspects I've spoken about combine to make a very entertaining movie. The Cruella at the moment is available on Disney Premier Access, which means you have to pay a bit extra money. It's about roughly 20 of whatever your currency is, it's about that. I think it's 17.99 euros here in Ireland at the moment. It might be wrong, might be a little bit more. But this is the first time I've watched a movie on Disney Premier Access where I felt I got value for money, despite it still being ridiculously expensive. I think this is a very enjoyable movie. I think it's a movie that I will watch again in the future. And not too many movies I've watched recently have that rewatchability. I really enjoyed this movie, far more than I ever thought I was going to. I was surprised with how much I enjoyed this movie, but as I say, maybe it's because my expectations going into this movie were very, very low, that I just enjoyed the movie. I was hooked all the way through. I've mentioned all the things I liked about the movie throughout. I'm not going to go into the story too much because I don't want to give out any spoilers. There's stuff about the ending that you could talk about, but maybe in the comment section we'll talk about that if anyone wants to talk about the twist, because of course every movie has a twist. I will say I think the twist is done very well. They could only do certain things, and there's obviously always going to be a twist, but I think they handled it very well. That's all I'll say about the twist, because I don't want to put any spoilers in there. So then it comes down to the rating, and what would I give Cruella out of 10? I've racked my brains all night about this one because I watched it last night. For me, I would give it an 8 out of 10. Now, I've said fairly recently I'm going to start being much stricter with my ratings, because certain movies I gave higher ratings than I intended to looking back on it. 8 out of 10 is a damn high rating. I think the only movie so far, there's possibly 2 movies, but I think the only movie I've given a higher rating to Cruella than Cruella is Promising Young Woman, which I give like a 9 out of 10. It's slightly below that level, but it's still a very, very enjoyable movie. I'm not too sure that kids are going to enjoy it as much as a big kid enjoys it, but it is certainly a dark movie. It's got darker elements, but it's a well-told story, very well paced. It will keep your attention all the way through, and I can't recommend checking out Cruella highly enough. I think it was a fantastic, very enjoyable movie, but of course I want to know your thoughts in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of Cruella. Did you love it? Did you hate it? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Do you think it's gonna get a sequel? I think it more than likely will. But with all that said and done, thank you so much for watching.